All right, let's talk about putting this transmission together. This is a 37 CAD LaSalle trans. The 37 is the 1-year top shift only. We have everything out of this transmission. We're actually going to convert this one to the Oldsmobile short tail shaft. So I had another video that shows the disassembly of that 50 Oldsmobile, and now we're going to be putting everything into this 37. Now I have done some work to this 37 case in order to get it to where I'm ready to assemble it. I've done some machine work to it. What machine work have I done to it? I've taken the shaft, the gear cluster shaft, and I've opened this up to 1 inch to allow for the later gear clusters. And another thing that I did, which may be kind of hard to see, but I took and spot faced this area to allow for some insertion of some O-rings on the shaft. And I'll show you when we get into that a little later. The other thing that I've done to this case is that I've machined where the rod for the shift fork, I've machined that to allow for a lip seal to be pressed in there after we get all the assembly done. Okay. Let's talk about some of the things that have been done. First of all, I made this wood cradle in order to put the trans in so that I can put it upside down and move it all around and have someplace, because it doesn't like to sit flat on top of the shifter. Okay, so I've taken the 37. I can shorten the shafts and respline them. This is actually a 38 plus. But I can shorten them, respline them, thread the end of them if you're going to do the closed drive shaft. What is the difference between the 37 and the 38 plus shafts? Here's the difference between the two. You can see that the 37 has a large bearing journal, whereas the 38 plus has a smaller bearing journal. Everything else on them is basically the same. Some are longer, some are shorter from this area back. But it really doesn't matter if you're shortening them, which one you're going to use, as long as your input shaft is the same size. So I'm taking the 50 Oldsmobile shaft, which is a little bit longer, and I'm going to be installing that in here for that conversion. One thing to note on these shafts, for holding second gear on, there is a snap ring, a retaining ring. These are not all the same thicknesses. You probably can't tell from the video, but those two are different sizes. And I've also seen them different in 38 pluses. Some are the larger, some are the thinner. This is what the snap ring looks like. I really do not care for these. So I've taken and made it so that I can use a regular snap ring with regular snap ring pliers. Okay, one more quick thing that I've done on the shafts that go through, that hold the gear clusters. I've taken those and I've put a square groove ring on them. I had to make these little compressors to slide over them so that I can slide the shaft in and compress those O-rings before it goes through the housing, or else it likes to tear up those rings. That's the reason why I had to counterbore this area where the shaft goes, is to have, because it's kind of on an angle and you don't get a good lead in for those O-rings. So, all right, probably some other stuff that I've forgotten, but we'll get into it and go through it as we go. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to put in this the synchro fork. I've gone through and fixed these. They were metal on metal, and I went through and rebrazed them and recut them so that they're really good. This is a tapered pin that goes in. Okay, this is how the assembly goes in, like this. So we got to take the pin out, and this slides through the front. So it slides through the front, and then it goes on, and then the pin goes in. The pin goes in from through the top. So in order to do that, and in order to take them out, you have to have a slide hammer in order to take them out. So I made this little slide hammer and have so that the pin can thread into it. These tapered pins are threaded quarter 28 if you have to ever take one of these apart. So we're going to thread that in. We're going to flip the trans over and put the pin in for this fork. Got to get it to line up. Set it on its side. Okay, now that I have it in, I just kind of press it in kind of tight. I unthread it. And then you want to take and you want to set that pin in place and tap it down. Making sure you don't booger up the threads, or else you'll never be able to get it back apart. Okay. So that one's in. So in order to take that out, like I say, you have to thread this puller down on there with a slide hammer and be able to get it to come out. Okay, I'm just going to thread that down on there to make sure that I didn't booger up the threads, so that when I do have to take it apart at some point, I can pull that apart. Okay, so that's the first step, is you got to set that in. All right, the next step is so there's some detents down on the bottom side. These detents here, there's a ball that rides in those detents, and that's what clicks. So now we need to put this other shift fork in. We'll go in like this, This is the one that pokes sticking out of the front all the time. This one shifts first gear and reverse in and out of gear. So when this goes together, there's 3 notches on the shaft, and they're at different heights. So when you put the synchro shaft in, you want to slide it over so that it fits on that first groove. All right. Now, is what we have to do is there's a spring, a pin, and 2 balls that go in. Okay, so the ball goes in the first hole down on the inside, and I just move the shift fork back and forth till I can see the ball drop to its lowest point. And then there's a spring that goes in, and then the pin goes inside the spring, and then the ball goes on top of that. And what it does is that the spring then gets compressed and the ball rides on this shaft into those detents. Okay, so this is one of the most difficult parts of this trans. And let me see if I can get it over here so you can see. So it's through this access hole. Okay, when you take the trans apart, you don't want to remove this 1/4-inch pipe plug, because when you do and you pull this shaft out, it releases the ball and it comes flying out. So you want to leave that in there. All right, so we're going to then put this in there. You have to compress this all the way so that it goes past the shaft so that you can slide the shaft in. It's a tricky job to do, so I've made a couple special tools. I took a 1/4-inch plug and drilled it and threaded it 1032 so that I can run a bolt down in there and have the bolt ride up against the shaft while it's fully compressed, and then the ball sits a little bit on the shaft, so then I can then press the shaft in past the ball. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, so I've made another special tool. So I'm gonna first thread this one in. I bought a 1/4 drive. You can buy whatever you want. I wanted the 1/4 drive just so that it was more nostalgic, because that's what they used with the original trances. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to thread that in. So now I'm compressing the spring. If you can see down in there, I think. See the spring. So we're going to now compress all that. So you can compress it and then look down in the hole to see until that ball goes past where the shaft is. All right, so now I'm down at the bottom. Otherwise, you're pressing in on that hard spring and then trying to push the shaft in. Okay, so now I'm going to push the shaft in. And now that the shaft went up and hit the bolt, oh, here's another thing that I ended up doing. So I replaced this rubber piece because the transmission, the stick shift, is what hits up against it whenever you go to change into second and third gear. Okay, so it's a rubber piece that was on there from the factory, and I've got a replacement for that now. So Let's put this back in. I slide it up against it. Now, once you start to release the tension on this spring and the ball, it wants to push the shaft out. And it's hard to hold it and press on it and, and get it to where you need it to be. So I made another little fixture. Right, so now I've got a little bit of tension, so I can back out this. Now it's got tension on it, and all I have to do is smack it just a little bit, and you'll see that it just pushed right on in. That saves a lot of headache right there. All right. Now that is in, I can remove this plug again because it doesn't have to be in there now. And now I will slide this in. So we have that. We need to put the input shaft in. I've put a sealed bearing and a regular snap ring on this one also, in order to eliminate those other rings. So we're gonna put that in. Okay, I was gonna show you. I'm gonna put a little bit of gear oil on those bearings, just so that there's some oil on those when it starts up. All right. Okay, now we're gonna wanna put the synchro in. We're gonna wanna put this fork, the synchro fork, in the middle position. As we put it in the middle position, this will then allow us to slide the synchro all the way out, slide it in, get it in place, slide it forward. All right, now that we have all of that in, then we can put in the reverse gear set that goes right down in here. So it will go down in and it'll slide up in like this, and then the shaft will go in. There are 2 thrust washers that have to go in. Now this gets kind of tricky because these thrust washers and the way that the trans was made is for all this to load in while it's upside down, so they have little hangers on them. So those have to go in and hang on the slots. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of gear oil on the inside, because it rides on these little bearings on the inside. They're not roller bearings, they're just sleeves. And then we'll take a little bit and just put on the outside of those. So that's the first one. So it's going to go in. I'm just going to stick my finger on the inside, get it placed where it needs to be on that hanger. So that it sits flush. Before I do that, I'm gonna set my O-rings. So I put a little bit of oil on my O-rings. They're not O-rings, they're flat rings. And I made these little compressors so that it just I went a little bit too far. So that it compresses them, so I can then push them in. So I'll put this one back in, get it on that hanger, start it going in. Oh, forgot to tell you, so there's this hole on it. This hole needs to face up and it needs to go in this hole because the bolt that goes in there has a shaft on it, and it's going to go through there and into this as a keeper. Okay, so I'm going to start that just so that it holds that thrust washer on so it doesn't go anywhere. Put a little bit of gear oil on these faces. All right, now there's another one that goes in, and again it goes right in between, but it has a hanger on it also, so it has to go from the top down. So we'll put a little bit of oil on there too. You gotta mess with it till you can find where that slot is on it, and then it'll push right up in. Okay. Now, one thing that I did not do was make sure that I mark the shaft. So if you mark the end of the shaft with an up arrow, you can make sure that when you push it in, after you're finished rotating it around, that it's still lined up. Now it's lined up, I can just push it through, and I can see my hole down in the bottom. I'm compressing those O-rings with that shaft. Okay. Now when this bolt goes down in there, it will align with that shaft, and then that shaft cannot come out. All right, now we can put in a shaft, tail shaft, and first gear reverse will go on. Then we will have second gear go on. Then we will have a thrust washer go on, and you got to find the groove that it goes on so that it can slide all the way down inside. After it's down inside, then a snap ring will go on. This is the pain in the rear snap ring, and that's why I'm replacing it with a regular snap ring. Okay. We're going to put the shift fork on the gear, and then we're going to slide the gear down in and put the shift fork onto the shaft. All right, now that the shift fork is on the shaft, we're then gonna put the pin in so that that's in place. Okay, this one I'm just going to tap in, not too hard right now, just so that it doesn't fall off, and I'll reseat this one later. Okay, now that that's in, we then can take the shaft and put the shaft in and line it up with that gear. And we have to put in the second gear. Put that on. Gonna need to mark where it's up for this groove so that you know how to put on the ring, because this has a little groove in it, little notch, and so it has to go on there so that it can slide all the way over. Otherwise you won't get it on, and then you'll have to pull it all back out again. All right, so we're going to put that on, we're going to slide that in. Going to make sure, okay. Then the ring's got to go on. And it's on that tooth there. Okay, before I put the snap ring on, I'm just going to slide everything together to make sure that I have everything where it needs to be. Because that snap ring, oh yeah, okay, because that snap ring is a chore to do. All right, so now I'm going to slide it back out. That ring is still on. I have a pair of snap rings. I just bought them off Amazon, and they fit the snap ring really good. So now let me push the shift fork all the way back so that I can have a little bit more room to get in there with the snap ring pliers, because there is not a lot of room. just going to take a brake adjusting tool, because it's got a little angle on it, and press up against it, make sure that it's set. All right, that's set. Now all of that can get all pushed together. So we'll slide it in, get it to mesh with the synchro, get it to go all the way in. There we go. Everything's together now. All right, I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on this synchro slider. So I machined that and I got a nice tight fit on there. All right. All right, now we have the snap ring that needs to go on the front bearing. So I'll just kind of muscle that one on, slide it on, and kind of spin it around. Okay, that one's on. The back one is on. It's now. Okay, so second gear just spins. All right, now the gear cluster needs to go in. This one is a little tricky because it has a lot of these needle bearings, and you don't want to drop the needle bearings down inside, because then you have to try to fish them out. So these needle bearings, so there's 28 of them on each end, and they measure 0.1245 in diameter, and the length is 1.114. I'm sure the length can vary, but not the diameter. So they're not quite 1/8 of an inch, just barely shy. Okay, so now we need to put all these in here and try to keep them in there so that we can put the gear cluster in and put the shaft through it. So that's where it becomes a chore. So what I did was I got a wood dowel so that this wood dowel can go through all the way through the other side, so I can put these in, stack all the bearings in, put some gear oil on them, and then try to get it back in there without having a big mess. Again, this one has, after the gear set goes in, it has a thrust washer that will go on first, and then this other thrust washer will go on up against the casting. Then on the other end, we're lucky enough to have another thrust washer with a hanger on it. Okay, and again, it has to go upside down. So I have another wood dowel, and we'll put that through with the hanger when we go to push everything through, so that we can hang this thrust washer on there like that, and then slide everything down and try to get it to all go together. It works, it's just some finagling. So I'm gonna set this down, and I'm gonna load in all of the bearings and then there's a washer that goes on it. See, I already dropped one all the way through. All right, now I got them all in there. You saw that I had to start over again, but I will also take and put gear oil down on those also. All right. Now there's a washer that goes on, and this washer has a flat side and then a beveled side. The bevel side goes against the needle bearings, and you can tell when you take it apart. You'll see that there's a little ring on the inside where the bearings were riding. All right, now I gotta flip it over and do the other side. All right, I'm gonna gear oil in there too. What gear oil am I using? I'm using a 90 weight API GL-1 from Napa. You can't just use any gear oil because some gear oils attack the brass and the bronze that are in these transmissions. So you have to make sure you use something that they would have used back in the day. Beveled edge, you can see that a little better maybe, shiny. Goes against the needle bearing. All right, now we want to be careful. And I cut this dowel so that it's just long enough to allow me to put on these thrust washers. See how that thrust washer just hangs on the outside. We have the other side that just barely has it on there also. I'm going to set this aside for a second. I'm going to put some gear oil on this hanging thrust washer. Hanger. Bring that wood dowel out just so that it barely is holding on. Take our 1-inch shaft, oil up those O-rings a little bit. Okay, this one again has a hole in the shaft which goes here. I'm gonna mark this one too, so that I know where the top is. So when I do my initial push in, I can make sure that it's straight. All right. Guide it down in so that everything meshes, and then start wiggling. So with that shaft and that shaft locked, we now have a 37 LaSalle converted with the Oldsmobile tail shaft. All right, let's finish putting it back together some more. Now, another thing that I have done is with the cover, you can see that this cover has a traditional drain plug now. These use a pipe plug, and I go through and open them up, thread them to the machine thread, face this surface off so that it's perpendicular with the threads, and then I'm using a drain plug with a rare earth magnet in it, with a crush washer so that it won't leak. My goal has been to try to get these transmissions so that they're try to be leak free. Okay, now we can put the inspection cover on. When I put that inspection cover on, there's a gasket set that you can buy, and Best Gasket makes it. It's a 8105 set, and you will get this gasket. You'll get the front gasket for the transmission to bell housing, and you'll get a tail shaft gasket. If you're doing the Ford conversion, you won't use this one, you'll use a different one, but that's okay. I'll also use some shellac to put this together. Some gasket shellac compound. I'll put all that on the gasket, and then bolt it all together. The tail shaft. We'll use a gasket, and it will go directly on also. All right. I think I'm gonna just put some oil on these gears. Because it's not going to go right in a transmission right now, or not in a car right now. It's going to sit and store for a little bit. All right. So with the shellac, you're supposed to coat both surfaces and let them get tacky and dry. Some people don't like to use this, but I do. All right, we're gonna let it sit for a minute, and then we'll come back and put it together. All right, so we're ready to put this cover on. Need a 1/2 and 9/16 inch socket. Got my hands all cleaned up from the shellac. I'm gonna put that on. Oh. All right, we need to put in this plug. Can't forget this plug over here on the side. That's the bearing keeper. We'll want to plug that. It is a pipe plug. I'm going to put some black silicone on it to seal it. Tighten that up in a minute. We need to make sure we set the clutch fork in the back, that one tapered pin. So we need to shift it through the gears, pull it forward. Okay, pulled it forward so that I can get in through that inspection hole. You want to make sure this one's down pretty good. Just so I don't mess up the threads. Okay. Got the inspection cover over here on this side, or I should say this threaded hole over here. I'm gonna put some RTV around it also. I'm gonna go get my acetone rag. I'm just gonna clean up this shellac around. Okay, so the tail shaft has a gasket. And then the tail shaft goes on. There's a bearing inside the tail shaft and a seal. So we'll put some oil on that before we put it all together. Let's shift the transmission back some. Okay, now I've opted to put studs in here. You can put bolts. Some of the 50s olds that I've taken apart have had studs, some have had bolts. I've opted for studs. So I'm gonna seal these also with some RTV, just so that they don't leak coming out of the studs. Use a stud wrench to tighten the studs. Now we've got to get messy again with some shellac. I'm going to put some gear oil on the bearing surface. I'm also going to put some gear oil in this bearing. Some gear oil on the gear for the speedometer. One thing to note, after I got it back together and whatnot, and I put these studs in, you have to make sure that this one stud here is not too long. It will go in and bottom out on one of the gears, and then the trans won't spin. So I had to take it all apart to figure out why it was binding up, and come to find out it was just this one stud. So I had to shorten that stud going in, and now everything works fine. It's in reverse right now, as you can see. As I turn one way, it spins the other direction. There is a hole in the top of this. I don't know exactly how it got in there or what it was, but it was probably a breather that somebody did at some point, since this case was just a raw case. I'm going to plug this hole because it already has a breather back here in the back from the 50 olds. All right. Now we can put the stick on. The stick has a pin, a spring, and a cup. And it slides right on down in. The cup slides right on over. Okay, so right now we're in neutral. On the 37, you can look and see this is the shift rod that pokes out. So that is neutral. Okay, third gear, I should say, second gear, first gear, it sticks way out, and then neutral, and reverse. Reverse, it sticks all the way in, and then neutral. So that's where we're going to take and take this little lip seal and press it right in there. Put a little bit of oil on that seal. Now we have a good seal on that shift rod, so we don't get a bunch of leakage coming out of the front. Here we go, can't get any better than that. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this had some good information, because I have not seen any 37 LaSalle Trans videos at all. So if you have any questions, reach out to me.